Eleanor Vance had built her empire from boardrooms and battles, from late-night mergers and takeovers that would have crushed lesser visionaries. At 47, she was one of the most feared and respected billionaire CEOs in North America. She ran Vance Global Holdings like a general commands an army, with an instinct for numbers so sharp that rivals called her the Iron Calculator. Her glass tower headquarters in Manhattan was a monument to her will, its top floors soaked in chrome and leather and the smell of success polished to a ruthless shine. But beneath the marble lobby and biometric security gates, far below the suites where executives strutted in $1,000 shoes, another world existed. It was a world of muted uniforms, mop buckets, and faces no one noticed. This was where the janitorial staff worked, arriving before dawn and vanishing before the C-suite even sipped its imported coffee. Eleanor barely knew their names. She didn't need to. They weren't part of her realm. It was during one of those midweek investor briefings, where numbers were missiles and forecasts were landmines, that the joke was born. Some board members were twitchy about the upcoming quarterly call. The economic downturn gnawed at their nerves, and whispers of cost-cutting floated like vultures overhead. Eleanor, irritated with the gloom, flicked away a suggestion from one of the directors about outsourcing more departments. "If things get worse," muttered Charles Winthrop, a smug legacy board member with inherited money and inherited arrogance, "we might as well start asking the janitors for financial advice." The table chuckled obediently. Eleanor didn't laugh, not because she found it offensive, she didn't waste emotion on such things, but because a different instinct stirred. Her mind enjoyed irony as much as it enjoyed conquest. She leaned back, eyes glinting with mischief and detachment. "Let's do it," she said. The room froze. Charles blinked. "Do what?" "Let's ask one of the janitors for financial advice," Eleanor replied smoothly. "If we're going to joke, we may as well commit." Everyone thought she was jesting. But Eleanor rarely joked. She commanded. And within the hour, her executive assistant, a wiry perfectionist named Mara, descended to the lower level in heels that didn't belong anywhere near a mop. That was how Jacob Rowe first heard his name spoken by someone wearing diamonds. Jacob had been working at Vance Global for 2 years. Before that, he'd repaired HVAC systems, fixed school boilers, and quietly helped his neighbors navigate bills and broken pipes. He was 52 with hands calloused from labor and eyes that held the kind of calm that life's storms either shatter or forge. His uniform was faded at the seams, but he kept it clean. He didn't complain when people stepped around him as though he were part of the wall. He didn't mind silence. He understood more in silence than most people did in noise. When Mara appeared in the custodial hallway, the other janitors scattered like birds. She spoke his name like she was reading it off a clipboard made of frost. "Mr. Rowe, the CEO would like to see you. Now." Jacob glanced at the floor he was mopping, then at Mara. "Is there a spill upstairs?" She didn't answer. She just turned and walked away, expecting him to follow. He wiped his hands on a cloth and did. Elevators that had never carried a janitor before opened their golden jaws. Jacob stepped in. A security guard eyed him as though waiting for him to steal something. The ride up was silent, but he could feel the altitude of money pressing against his chest. When the doors parted on the 84th floor, the world changed. The air smelled different, expensive, conditioned, perfumed with ego and Italian upholstery. Assistants glanced up, confused to see someone in navy coveralls emerge into their territory. Mara led him into a boardroom with floor-to-ceiling glass and a table that looked like it had been carved from a single ancient tree. Eleanor sat at the head, surrounded by executives in tailored suits. They looked at Jacob as though he'd wandered into the wrong universe. Eleanor didn't smile. "Mr. Rowe, thank you for coming." Jacob nodded once. "Yes, ma'am, we're having a lively conversation about financial direction," Eleanor said, voice honed to a scalpel. "And someone suggested," she allowed her eyes to flick toward Charles, "that we ought to seek the wisdom of the janitorial staff. So here you are." A few suppressed laughs rippled around the table. Jacob didn't look embarrassed. He stood with the quiet stillness of a man who has weathered things they couldn't imagine. Eleanor crossed her legs. "Mr. Rowe, if you were in charge of a company like this, worth $68 billion, what is the first financial move you would make?" She expected babble, confusion, or stammering. Something entertaining. The room leaned forward like spectators at a small cruelty. Jacob looked at her for a long second. Then he spoke. "My first move." His voice was steady, unhurried. "I'd fire the people who think the janitor's opinion is a joke." The silence that followed was not the silence of boredom. It punched the air out of lungs, slapped smugness off faces, and nailed attention to the table. Charles Winthrop's mouth actually opened. One executive coughed but choked it back. Mara blinked. Eleanor did not move, but something behind her eyes shifted, a faint recalibration. The corner of her lip twitched, not into a smile but into something rarer, interest. Jacob continued, not rudely, not emotionally. Simply stating facts. Any company where leadership makes fun of the people who keep the floors clean is a company with blind spots. And blind spots are how you lose money. No one breathed. Eleanor tilted her head. Go on. Jacob walked forward, not to the table but toward the window. He didn't touch anything. He looked out over the city briefly, then back at her. Someone who thinks a janitor can't understand finances doesn't understand people. Most of us down there know the cost of everything, because we've had to count it. You want advice? Start by knowing what you waste. Charles spoke up, voice brittle. And what exactly do we waste? Jacob glanced at him, then back to Eleanor. Potential. The word landed like a stone in water, sinking through layers of ego and expectation. Eleanor felt it, not as an insult, but as a diagnosis. Jacob clasped his hands loosely in front of him. But that's not really what you're asking. If you want strategy, I'd start with your board. Too many people at the top who've never been at the bottom. That creates decisions that look good on charts and bad in real life. You want stability? Bring in someone who's had to stretch a dollar so thin they could see through it. One of the executives muttered, "This is ridiculous." Eleanor raised a hand without looking at him, and the man went silent. Jacob's gaze remained calm. You asked what I would do first. That's what I'd do. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. She had built empires by recognizing leverage in unexpected places. She did not dismiss him. Not after that. Mr. Rowe, she said quietly, have you studied finance? A bit, Jacob replied. Personal, small business, municipal budgets. You learn things when you have to fix a church furnace out of pocket before winter hits. Charles scoffed. This is absurd. Eleanor didn't turn her head. Charles, if you speak again, I will have security escort you from this building. The color drained from his face. Jacob waited. He didn't fidget. Eleanor finally nodded to Mara. Get us a private room. Within minutes, Jacob was seated across from Eleanor in her office, a space twice the size of most apartments and with a skyline view so vast it seemed unreal. The door closed. The noise of the board faded. Eleanor rested her elbows on her desk. Who are you really? Just a janitor, Jacob said. No, she replied softly. Not after that. He said nothing. Eleanor's mind raced through files, names, resumes. She remembered something in his HR intake forms, degree in mechanical engineering, briefly ran a small repair company. Bankruptcy during the 2008 crash. Wife passed 5 years ago. One daughter in college. Nothing that explained the way he spoke. You're not intimidated, she said. Should I be? Most people who asked that expected no answer. She wasn't most people. She recognized the mirror in it. Power didn't scare him because he didn't mistake it for worth. Tell me something, she said. Why did you take a custodial job here? Because it was steady, Jacob said. And quiet. And after losing a business, you learn peace is worth more than pride. She absorbed that. Do you know how many people up here would rather die than take a job like yours? Jacob shrugged. Then they don't know what survival costs. Eleanor stood and walked to the window. Below, the city pulsed with money and desperation in equal measure. You said potential is being wasted, she said without turning. Where? Everywhere people think status makes them smart, Jacob answered. She turned then. He held her gaze without challenge, without worship. It was unnerving, refreshing. Eleanor returned to her chair. You embarrassed my board. They embarrassed themselves. She didn't argue. Tell me, Mr. Rowe, she said, her voice softer now, if you weren't joking, and I did put you in front of numbers, real numbers, what would you do? Jacob exhaled slowly, as though weighing whether the effort was worth the breath. Then he began. He spoke of inefficiencies he'd observed without meaning to, shipments arriving at odd hours, contractors overbilling because no one checked invoices thoroughly, light sensors in empty conference rooms flashing on at 3 a.m. because someone had set the timers wrong 2 years ago and no one bothered to fix them. He mentioned how many paper towels were thrown away half-used, how often broken equipment was replaced instead of repaired, how overtime hours were burned masking scheduling incompetence. Eleanor listened, not politely, intently. He spoke of things no consultant could see because consultants flew too high. He spoke of the quiet economy of workers who stretched resources with invisible hands. He spoke of dignity disguised as labor. When he finished, Eleanor sat in silence. "Do you know," she said at last, "what I pay some of the men who sat in that room?" Jacob nodded once, enough to ignore the people who clean their mess. She almost smiled. "You understand you've just given me more actionable insight in 20 minutes than my strategy team did in 6 months. I'm just telling you what's leaking," he said. "You can't steer a ship if you don't patch the holes." She leaned back. For the first time in months, something in her uncoiled, a tension she hadn't known she carried. "I'm not done with you," she said. "I didn't think you were." And that was how it began.